everybody, and welcome to the Money and Metals Network online coin talk. My name's Campbell, and today I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Clare Rowan. Claire earned her doctorate at Macquarie University on the Severance. She served as the Macquarie Gale Scholar at the British School of Rome, delving into the Severan transformation of the city. She further honed her expertise at the Goethe University in Frankfurt, where her research focused on the dynamics of power in the Western Mediterranean, specifically through the lens of coinage from 500 to 100 BC. In 2012, Claire joined the University of Warwick, where she has been recognised for her exceptional teaching with a Warwick University Award for Teaching Excellence in 2015. Her innovative research has also earned her a prestigious European starting grant for a groundbreaking project on ancient tokens, which I'm sure will come into today's talk. Claire's research is deeply influenced by how ancient coinage served as a medium for negotiating power, expressing identity, and bridging different cultures. Her work extends beyond economic contexts, exploring the multifaceted roles of coinage, rituals, memory, decoration, and public records. Claire is also the editor for Ancient Numismatics at the Numismatic Chronicle, a council member of the Royal Numismatic Society, and serves on the editorial board of the Journal of the Numismatic Association of Australia. Her contributions continue to shape the field, providing invaluable insights into the ancient world and its lasting legacy. So before I hand over to Claire, as usual, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat. At the end, Claire and I will go through the questions together. And of course, if you have more questions, you can post them then too. It's a Q&A. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Claire.
Thank you. I'll also just say I've put in the meeting chat some links to some of the resources I'll be talking about today, just in case you can't click straight off the screen in Teams. What I'm going to do today is talk to you about the tokens, the Roman tokens from Rome and Ostia. And I just wanted to preface this talk by saying that in antiquity, quite a few cities and regions issued tokens. But what's kind of characteristic of that is that each region or city had their own approach to token production, and tokens looked different in different areas. So for instance, in what was ancient Spain, tokens are quite large actually, and struck lead. In Palmyra, in Syria, tokens are generally made out of clay and fired to make terracotta. So the tokens I'm talking about today, in essence, are the tokens that are characteristic of the city of Rome and Ostia, who have their own, let's say, culture of token manufacture, token production, and produce tokens that are characteristic only of that area. So if you came for tokens of other regions, I apologize in advance. Perhaps we can have some more token talks in the future. So essentially in Rome and Ostia, there are two main types of tokens. There's struck tokens in bronze and orichalcum or brass. And I've just put an example of one of these on the slide here, which is a rather nice portrait of Augustus. And then the other main type of token from Rome and Ostia are cast lead tokens. And I've put an example of one here, which shows a winged caduceus. Simply because many of you may be working in museums in Britain or in excavations in Britain, I will just have the briefest forays into what tokens in Roman Britain look like. And in essence, compared to Rome and other areas, tokens in Britain or Roman Britain are extremely rare, in fact. So there might be one found at a site excavation, but generally they're not as abundant as elsewhere. And this is probably due to the fact they're also not particularly abundant along the northern frontier in Germany, and probably then just in these kind of frontier provinces, they were not as used as often. So I've just kind of put an example of what tokens in Roman Britain look like. So we have the bronze tokens struck in Rome, might sometimes travel in kind of a secondary context. So there's the famous, sex token that was found in the Thames, which made the news a few years ago, which I've put in the bottom corner there with the PAS reference. Tokens might also come across in late antiquity when they were made out of bronze, and so clearly just kind of functioning in a secondary context. Apart from that, you might get things like this in the middle, which essentially looks a bit like a lead disc. But they also have what also been discovered in Britain are love tokens, actually. And so I've put an example of that there. Again, plundered from the PAS. But yeah, so if you're thinking, why aren't there any tokens on my site in Britain? That's to be expected. And yeah, I would be quite surprised if one might come up, but it would be unusual to have very many. I thought I would try and recreate the effect of having an in-person kind of session by bringing along some tokens to show, just to kind of show you. So the pictures I've chosen, obviously, to illustrate tokens are nice pictures in high quality conditions, and if you're working in a museum or something, or in a site, you are likely not to see something that nice. So I've just photographed two tokens, from our collection. And I thought, I could actually just also hold them up to the screen. But unfortunately, I couldn't find any blue gloves to handle the lead with. We appear to have run out. And unfortunately, the shininess of this, I feel like the shininess defeats the purpose. But anyway, this was my attempt to try and create something. But yeah, so often they might be quite worn. I know from excavations in Italy, actually, at Gabii, it was only when they had metal detectorists run over the fill that they actually managed to uncover the tokens from the excavations, and they weren't being spotted by the naked eye during the excavation. So this might also kind of explain why tokens don't really turn up a lot in excavations. So, as I mentioned, in Rome and Ostia, there are two types of approach to manufacturing tokens in the main. One is by casting lead tokens from molds. And so I've put some examples of molds here to illustrate that. And so as you can see, they come in different shapes and sizes. And from one mold, actually, you can actually cast a whole series of tokens with different designs and different shapes. We find these molds scattered throughout Rome and Ostia, so there's not a centralized production. It appears to be kind of ad hoc, and when you think about the low melting point of lead and the fact that the marble that they use to carve the molds, which is Palombino marble, is quite a soft marble actually, it's clear that for the lead at least, it's completely distributed production. The fact that they're cast from molds that might contain all different designs on one mold makes it extremely difficult actually to try and catalog these artifacts or kind of order them, because in essence we don't have enough molds compared to the number of tokens we have, and also we normally only have 1/2 of the mold. So this makes it quite difficult to figure out what was going on. There are some rare occasions where we have both halves, but essentially you end up with just like 1/2 of a mold that's been discarded in essence after use, or if it broke. So really then we can think about, distributed production. And we do also find in excavation in Rome and Ostia kind of these like lead trees where someone's cast tokens. The black and white picture I have was from the theatre in Ostia, and it was clearly discarded because perhaps the casting wasn't as nice as one would want. But we also find kind of lead abandoned after the little kind of tokens have been snapped off as well. The other main type, of course, are the bronze and brass or orichalcum tokens, which look much nicer. I should say with the lead, it's clear also the distributed manufacture is evident in the varying of the quality of the designs. So some designs are really nice, and some designs are essentially stick figures that you or I might create ourselves if we were making some tokens. So there's wildly kind of varying skill levels at work. The bronze and brass tokens, as you can see, have a much higher skill level. And so there's a whole kind of collection of these that date to the Julio-Claudian period, including the so-called famous spintrii, which are these tokens that carry sex scenes, which you'll be unsurprised to learn are the best studied of all the tokens. They've received a lot of attention. The other tokens, not so much. So the word spintrii, I should say, is a modern term, even though it's in Latin. This is not what they were known as in antiquity. So there's kind of a collection of at the Julio-Claudian period that are interestingly all die-linked. So they're clearly coming out of one workshop in this period at least. And, as you can tell by the quality of the engraving, there's some skilled people working there. Might be the same people who are working at the mint, but clearly skilled. So I've put some examples of die links here. Essentially, if you have a token from the Julio-Claudian period and it has a number within kind of a dotted border and a wreath, that's how you can kind of tell it's Julio-Claudian, odds are it's going to die connect into the broader series. And so these tokens are characterized by sex scenes, by portraits of Julio-Claudian emperors, although I do have also Augustus, he's down the bottom here. But also some other scenes as well. So here we have a scene of two boys or men playing a board game. And on the token on top, we have another individual named Gaius Matthias. He was a magistrate of the Roman youth who made tokens as well. So it's clearly not an imperial production in that sense. It's more kind of private, officials, things like that. And so perhaps my kind of understanding of how this might work is that you wanted some tokens, so if you're wealthy enough, go down to the dedicated workshop and kind of request some to be made up. And my instinct is that the workshop reused the reverse dies and made new obverse dies with different designs. Bronze and brass tokens then continue into the sort of 2nd century AD and later 1st century AD, all the way up into late antiquity, actually. But these later ones are characterized by other designs. So I've just put some examples here, quite common ones. So a modius and a cantharus is a very common token. It's probably from the 2nd century AD. And there's a whole series of tokens with letters on them as well. And these are kind of the later ones. How do you identify these tokens if you happen to come across them or have them in your collection? So at the moment, there are two main kind of approaches, depending on whether they're lead or bronze. So the lead tokens were initially catalogued by Rostovtsev in 1903 in a book or catalogue published in Latin. So as part of the project that Campbell mentioned, I and others have been working to translate this Latin catalogue and also update it because it was full of errors and it missed out quite a lot of tokens. So that is now actually all available online. And I've put in the chat a link to the database of tokens and specimens. So you no longer have to plow through Rostovtsev's Latin. You can just type in a keyword and hopefully the type should appear if it's a lead token from Rome or Ostia. For bronze and brass, remarkably, the work continues to be Cohen from the 19th century. That is available online. And I should say we've also scanned in Rostovtsev and the catalogue that you can download for free if anyone was truly interested in going back to the original Latin and what Rostovtsev thought. So yeah, the Cohen is quite outdated, but it's still the most kind of, let's say, comprehensive catalogue of tokens made of bronze and brass that are out there. So we've also been adding Cohen onto the online database that you can access. Someone's asking why there is no audio. I hope everyone else can hear. I'll continue. And hopefully Campbell can sort that one out. So yeah, so if you go onto these databases online, you'll kind of bring up something that hopefully you'll recognize, which is, the same thing that we use for coins of the Roman Empire and the coin hoards of the Roman Republic, the stuff coming out of the ANS, it's all the same. So if you want to have a play around while I'm talking, you can click, for instance, on token specimens. And so I should say there are two types of database. There's kind of the type catalog, and we've also got a separate specimens catalog. And this includes like archaeological finds that we can't really identify, like, worn and worn. It also includes molds. So if you click on the token specimens database and put in mold as a keyword, you'll bring up a series of molds and images, so you can kind of see what's going on there. So it's useful to use both databases because sometimes, yeah, we record archaeological finds that can't be linked to a particular type because they're too worn or damaged or something like that. So if you are kind of rummaging in your museum drawers, so to speak, and thinking, oh, I wonder if we have any tokens, beware of your anonymous quadrantes. I don't know if anyone has ever been warned about anonymous quadrantes before, but essentially, because Cohen included these anonymous quadrantes in his tesserae, his tokens section, in most museums, that's where they are currently sitting. Equally, if you're doing any work on anonymous quadrantes, maybe ask to see the tokens or the tesserae, and you might end up with more specimens than you expect. I say this because each museum I visited, they're like, oh, we have hundreds of tokens, and I think, brilliant! And I would appear, and I would be presented with the trays, and they would all be anonymous quadrantes. And the curator would be like, oh, so it is. So, yeah, keep that in mind. And it's interesting, how do you tell the difference? I think if you have SC on your kind of bronze, odds are it's an anonymous quadrans. And if you don't know what the quadrantes are, these are the smallest kind of denominations in the Roman monetary system, kind of the equivalent of 1p. I'll also just say, if you have a token that you've got from excavation or in a museum and you're looking at the database and the catalog and you are like, my token is not there. This is to be expected, actually. So I think from Rome, we've got around 3,300 types identified, but I know more types keep appearing all the time. And that's simply just because, you know, Rostovtsev did a good job in 1903, quite frankly. But, you know, it's still an ongoing work and tokens keep appearing all over the place. So if you have what looks to be a unique type, I would say that is probably correct. People also ask me about the dates of tokens. They're very hard to date, in fact, because we don't have rulers' portraits on them most of the time. So we're reliant on archaeological contexts, and the majority of Roman-led tokens were dredged out of the Tiber. So no dates there. And in kind of more fine excavations, they're normally just found in fill or abandonment contexts, because essentially as a token, they're going to only have value for one period of time or for one particular event or one particular context, and then they're worthless and just get thrown away. So this also makes it extremely difficult to date tokens. So I kind of give a general date of between AD 1 and 300, which frustrates some, but I think it's kind of honest. You could also just say unknown date Roman Imperial. They're clearly a phenomenon largely of the Roman Imperial period, not the Republic. So tokens in Rome and Ostia, in essence, what the tokens themselves tell us from the designs, from the legends, is that they're made by a variety of groups, by emperors, magistrates, associations like workers' associations, cultic associations, individuals are sometimes named, and interestingly, this also includes women, not just men. We have a series of tokens naming particular bathhouses, so it's really kind of a wide variety of individuals. And as I was mentioning before, they're normally kind of just used for a single object, a single event, a single kind of context. And then they seem to have either been melted right back down and probably reused the lead, or they've been lost somewhere. And so the tokens we actually have surviving are those who kind of never fulfilled their life course, because they should have been handed in for an oyster or whatever you could get for your token. And the ones that survive this didn't happen to them. So this also means that most tokens, or quite a lot of tokens that we have, only exist in one specimen or 3 specimens. It's quite rare to have a bulk of the same type. I think most of them in Rome and Ostia are being used in these acts of euergetism, So individuals sponsoring particular events for others, whether you're like, I will sponsor the oil for you down at the local bathhouse on this particular occasion, or we're going to have a feast in honor of the birthday of the emperor. You know, your token gives you access to meat or whatever it might be. And so I think that's why we find so many in Rome and Ostia, because there is a lot of euergetism going on, whereas in the frontier zones, you know, I don't think it's as common, and it's probably sort of operating in a different way. So we can use tokens then to think about how the imperial image and the imperial family were conceptualized. They give us insight into festivals in Rome and Ostia, into different types of identities at different levels and for different groups. They also capture really wonderfully, I think, emotion, and I'll explore this in a minute. They're quite joyful things, actually. And they tell us quite a lot about bathing experiences as well, because clearly tokens were used in that context as well. And I think what I find engaging about tokens, and what I think separates them from coins, is that the tokens are really aimed to engage with their users in terms of prompting them to speak, prompting them to do a particular action, or asking them to identify themselves in the token, whether you're a male or a female. And I'll go on to give an example of this. And I think, they can be quite cryptic in a sense. They don't often have names on them or tell us who was responsible for them. But that's because, again, as opposed to coins, which were issued and then was kind of circulating around the whole Roman Empire, being used by different people, tokens are being issued by a group or an individual for a very defined purpose and a defined group, a defined context. So they don't need explanation in the same way that a coin needs to say, oh, I am a coin of Rome and I am of this emperor and blah, blah, blah. Because the users of these tokens would have understood whatever kind of cryptic, for want of a better word, imagery was being chosen. If you're not in the in-group, you're not going to be able to grasp it. And they are kind of, in a sense, a community building tool. Like if you're inviting someone to an event, you give them a token, for instance, and it's, of the people with the token who understand the imagery and the language, and those without the token. Like just by merely having a token and being involved in a particular event, it helps build community. And then, if the token is prompting you all to chant together, it also builds community and feelings of belonging. So I thought I'd just give a few examples of the sorts of things that I was talking about. So in terms of the imperial image, so some tokens were probably issued on behalf of the emperor, particularly in the early period, in the Julio-Claudian period. But tokens also kind of reveal how others conceptualize the emperor, and tokens also include members of the imperial family that we don't find on official coinage. So in this way, they're much broader than Roman coinage in terms of, how the emperor and the imperial family are represented. And I find in this way, they're probably closer to provincial coinage or something like that, in that we're getting a broader representation, and we're getting, the ideas of different people as to what the emperor and the imperial family were. So the example I've included in this slide is a token of Claudius, and his name is Claudius. But on the other side of the token, we have Messalina, kind of famously sexually promiscuous, not on Roman official currency, though she does appear on some provincial coins, but here on a token in Rome. And for Augustus as well, I mean, I don't know if anyone's realized this before. It only struck me the other day, actually, that Augustus doesn't strike any coins for Livia, his wife. She does appear in the provinces, but not on Roman official currency. But again, on tokens, here she is alongside Augustus, Dewgate portraits. And again, so it's this kind of extension of what we would normally have on Roman currency. Tokens are also really good for proving to people that people did actually look at coins. I think we're all coin lovers here. And, I don't know if you get this, I get it all the time. Who would have looked at a coin anyway? You're making it all up if you want to talk about imagery. But coin tokens, in fact, they clearly show a knowledge of coinage. It shows that people were in fact looking at coins. So this is an example from the Flavian dynasty. So we've got the Emperor Vespasian and his two sons, Titus and Domitian. So a series of official coins were released showing Vespasian on one side and his kind of sons on the other. And we have a token that basically picks up on this design, although it extends it, in fact. So we've got Vespasian on one side, and then on the other side we have Titus and Domitian. But whereas they're both kind of bareheaded on the coin, on the token they're both laureates. And Domitian probably should not have been laureate at this period, but again, we get this kind of extension of imperial ideology. And I should say, I mean, the fact that they choose lead for most of the tokens and that they never precisely imitate a coin design suggests that these are clearly not coins. They're not meant to pass as coins. They're clearly something different. And the fact that they're never found hoarded with coins suggests that everyone was very clear that this was not a fake coin, not meant to act as a coin, and something very different. Even when they kind of reference official coinage, it's never an exact imitation. Or you can see here too that Titus and Domitian are essentially represented by the letters T and Do, whereas on the coin they've got kind of like the full titulature running around. We also have tokens that are connected to spectacles. And as I was saying, tokens really do kind of open up this idea that they're meant to, as a user, you're meant to see yourself in the image. So they show something that's quite rare in the Roman world, and that is applause. So you can see here on this particular token, which has a gladiator on one side, these people which seem to have really long like arms applauding. And I think we know tokens were used during spectacles. I have a quote we'll look at in a minute. And in essence, this token, I think, is meant to say to people, hey, while you're at this spectacle, you should applaud because it's going to be great. And I think it reflects this Roman anxiety that, like, maybe you put on a show and everyone comes and nobody applauds. And we get hints of this anxiety elsewhere, actually. So Suetonius, when talking about the Emperor Nero, says when Nero would go and perform, he would actually train all these people up and position them in the crowd so that they would applaud. And they would start applauding, and everyone else would be, oh, yeah, okay, oh, applause, like prompting the applause. And I think we find something happening here. It's a prompt for applause. We have quite a few tokens connected to festivals. This is the Festival of Isis, and tokens connected to the Festival of Isis, which was a festival connected with the opening of the shipping season, continue into late antiquity. So we have, again, interestingly, I should say, if you look closely at the spectators applauding on this token, you can see one is a woman. She has her hair in a bun on the very left-hand side. The other one is a man. And similarly with these tokens, we have both a male and female priestess represented on one token. So regardless of your gender, you can identify in the image. So we've got kind of priests would dress up as Anubis, which is the jackal-headed god at this festival. And here we have the jackal-headed god, or a priest dressed as the jackal-headed god. This kind of slippage between, are you a worshipper, are you the god, was kind of characteristic of the festival itself, in fact. And on the other side, Isis, or a priestess of Isis, the same type of slippage. And again, tokens sort of showing the paraphernalia of this festival, the mask that would be worn by the priests, and the sistrum and patera that would be carried by the priestesses. So I find this kind of appealing to both genders very interesting, actually. So we do have some sources talking about tokens. So Marshall, he talks about tokens quite a lot, actually. Who's this kind of satiric poet, writes in his epigrams. He writes 2 epigrams basically aimed at someone he doesn't like. Someone called Sextilianus saying, you know, an equestrian is given 10 tokens, numismata. So everyone's getting 10 tokens, and these are clearly to exchange for drinks at the theatre at a particular event. And he's like, but Sextilianus, why do you have 20 drinks just by yourself? Sextilianus is drinking too much. In a later kind of epigram, he comes back to Sextilianus saying, you're drinking as much as 5 rows worth. You ask for bronze tokens, numismata, from all the people around you, blocks for that. Hey, you got a token. Hey, you got a token. Hey, you got a token. And, essentially trying to get everyone's tokens to get all the drinks himself. But you can see in this way the role that tokens might be playing during particular festival occasions. So we also have Cassius Dio talking about Agrippa when he was a magistrate and put on some spectacles and events in the theatre. At a certain point, he kind of just hurled tokens, they're called symbolo in Greek, into the crowd, and people could scramble for particular prizes, depending on whether you got a token or not. And Dio tells us that Titus also did that at the opening of the Colosseum, but Dio mentions that there were wooden balls, actually, on this occasion. So there's clearly, I think, tokens that were used in antiquity that have not survived to the present day. We mainly have the lead and bronze ones. There's also tokens that reference the Roman triumph and this chanting that I was talking about. So this is a bronze token, which has a laurel branch on one side and what looks like horseshoes on the other, but it's not horseshoes. These are armbands that were given to soldiers who performed particularly well as kind of an honor, and talks that were also given to soldiers who performed well as a particular honor. And you can see a kind of tombstone here with the soldier wearing his bracelets, and also the talks on his shoulder. But what is interesting is the token carries a chant, Yo Triumphe. And this was the chant we know that all the soldiers shouted as they marched through the streets of Rome as part of the Roman triumph. So you can imagine the soundscape, right? All these soldiers going through the streets of Rome, all shouting, Yo Triumphe. And that's the chant on this token. And so as a user or person being given this token, you immediately have that chant and the spur to say that chant in your head. We've also got tokens connected to the Saturnalia, to the Roman Christmas. And there was again a chant there, Yo Saturnalia Yo, which we find captured on this token with Yo Sat. So again, this idea that it's prompting a particular kind of chant or action from individuals. Yeah, tokens are also really great at capturing joy. The 2 boys playing the board game is a favorite token, but also this one, which essentially shows some builders and a crane. And I've got an example there of what kind of Roman cranes look like from a relief. And essentially at some point, someone's decided to get in the baskets and 2 other colleagues are pulling him up and he's going for a giant swing, and looks to be having a merry time of it all. But the whole image just captures joy, right, and fun. And if we think of the fact that tokens are being used in these festival contexts, in moments of kind of leisure and release, they are kind of capturing, let's say, the spirit in which someone should participate. I also wonder whether some tokens are actually satire. This particular example, which has a bust of someone named Olympianus and another named Eucarpus on the other side, has the sum of 1,000 sesterci named on it, which is quite, it's not a small sum and certainly worth more than 1 lead token. So perhaps this could be some sort of satiric joke gift given at the Saturnalia or something like that. Tokens are also really great sources for uncovering, as I mentioned, identities of particular individuals or groups that aren't otherwise represented. So one example are the Sicarii, and these are the individuals who were responsible for offloading the ships at the port, essentially like porters. So we find in Ostia kind of little terracotta representations of these guys, but they clearly formed an association together, like a workers' college, workers' association. And that's probably in that connection that the association issued tokens for whatever reason, which shows actually the Sicarius, the port worker, in quite a heroic fashion, nude, amphora slung over the shoulder, as a form of kind of identity. So how did the Sicarii conceptualize themselves? Probably in this way. And I've included another relief, which again shows nude, heroic Sicarii carrying Emperor off the ship. So we get these insights into different kind of workers' identities. We also get an insight into how the population of Rome conceptualized itself. We might think this might be through Roma, obviously, or the wolf and twins. But what occurs again and again on tokens is just the 3 letters GPR. And that's an abbreviation of the genius, the embodiment of the Roman people, who was kind of a nude guy, but he's not represented himself. It's normally just the letters GPR. As this is clearly a kind of very important form of identity that Romans connected to, which also says a lot of interesting things about literacy, actually. On the token on the top, the other side says Felicitor, often abbreviated just by an F. And again, this is a chant, this is a prompt. So Felicitor is essentially like best wishes. And we find Felicitor, I would say, quite a lot on Roman tokens and those from Ostia. I mentioned they were also used in bathing contexts, and here is just one example of that. It is a token from the Balaneum Germani, which we otherwise have no evidence for, don't know existed. A Balaneum is quite a small bathhouse, let's say, a smaller establishment, whereas termi were kind of vast imperial things. And it seems that these tokens were likely used actually in these smaller establishments. For whatever reason, I think probably to access services within the bathhouse. So you would go and have a bath, but you'd also get a snack and a bit of a scrape down with a strigil and all these things that were normally offered by slaves, actually. And probably it was through tokens that this was all kind of controlled and mediated. So individuals could represent themselves on their tokens if they wished. This might be through kind of the representation of their seal ring. So on this token on the top right, we have victory, but we also have an elephant coming out of a shell. Yes, indeed. And that's actually a very common ring design. So clearly people in the know would know who this referenced. We often have Romans just showing themselves through their initials, so 3 letters. So here, Pal, P-A-L, is probably Publius, someone. And again, because we're thinking about context where everyone kind of knew each other, it's already a known group, you didn't need more than the initials, actually. Think about kind of like a work environment when everyone gets a list of duties and everyone's initials are just next to it. Everyone knows who they are. The other side of the PAL token also has spectators applauding. Sometimes we have people kind of representing themselves via a portrait and a name, the full name. So this one down the bottom left is Publius Glitius Gallus, who we actually know. It's very rare. We find them elsewhere. And he's kind of represented himself in a way that's very like a coin, actually, with a portrait and the legend running around. On the other side of the token, we have a rooster with a palm branch, and rooster is Gallus in Latin, so he's also decided to go down the pun route. We might have people kind of shown together, here a male and female, without any further names. And as I mentioned, we also have women who issued tokens. This particular example I've included is one of tokens of someone named Hortensia Sporata. So she issued different sizes of tokens with different kind of variations on her name, with a palm branch within a wreath on the other side. I just wanted to also finish by talking a little bit about, like, if you have tokens in your collection, or what might you do with tokens, just thinking about how we can use them. So I think, as I hope I've illustrated, tokens are good kind of for micro-histories, for showing the perspectives of women, of workers, of kind of, let's say, diversifying our perception of history. They might enhance a particular theme. If you're putting on an exhibition on, spectacle, for instance, or like Gladiator, it's very topical now that the new Gladiator 2 has come out, the the preview. You might want to put a token in showing the spectators applauding, and which captures, I think, really nicely this anxiety about putting on events. It gives kind of an audio sensory feel in terms of chants, applause, and also quite a few tokens show body language. So like number counting with your hands, because they counted differently to us. Obviously, the spin tray remain eternally appealing, it seems. Everyone enjoys a good sex scene. They show emotions. And so, yeah, there's just a lot of things that you can do with them, actually, when you come across them. So I was up at the Hunterian actually working with their token collection, which was collected by William Hunter. And I'd say if you are working in Britain and you have tokens of this type, odds are they've been kind of bought on the Grand Tour or from Italy and brought across, like these ones. So we kind of created this exhibition online, the Roman World in 10 tokens, to just kind of capture that. So if you're kind of interested in that aspect, I've got the link there. I should say, just it's the way that the Hunterian runs their online exhibitions. Once you land on the exhibition, you have to click on the related items tab to actually bring up the different little bits. Yeah, it's not the clearest, but anyway. So I would also thought I would just end by saying, if you want to know more about tokens, there's actually a lot of open access publications available. Again, I've put the links in the chat. But yeah, so there's several books now available, as well as the databases, if you wanted to kind of read more on tokens. And so I'm going to leave it there, so we have time for kind of Q&A at the end.
Thank you very much, Claire, for that fascinating talk.
I realized I forgot to talk about the token I've just put here, which is, again, one of my favorite tokens. So this one shows a place called ad nuke, like at the nut tree. And we've got the nut tree shown and then kind of at the nut tree. So it's this kind of really wonderful conceptualization of space. We have also a reference to at the nut tree in inscriptions as well. So it was clearly a known place in Rome. Sorry, Campbell.
No, it's all good. Thank you for the talk. I'm just going to post a feedback form in the chat for everybody to fill in. We'd highly appreciate it if you could fill it in. And then if you have any questions, could you please post them in the chat, and Claire and I will go through them together. Keith has said, thanks, Claire. Very informative and a nice change from my normal coin preoccupation.
Yeah, you can go from numismatics to para-numismatics.
It is an interesting switch. But I like that you can still do the die links.
What kind of nut? Yeah, it doesn't say, unfortunately. It just says ad nucum. And I'm not that good on identifying botany, I am afraid. Yeah, as I say, I don't think that they're not, disappointingly, because I didn't know this when I set out on this project, I didn't realize how rare they were going to be in Britain, in response to David's question. But they are super rare in Britain, but very common, as I say, in Rome and central Italy. In Athens, they're particularly common, in Palmyra. But what's kind of fascinating is some cities clearly just go down the kind of route of making tokens, and other cities don't, which is kind of really bizarre how it happens, and each time locally. So, for instance, Palmyra, loads of tokens, and they're all used for banqueting only, connected to cults. And so the use of tokens is also quite local. But nearby there's another city, Europos, in Syria, not a single token, and they're basically next door to each other. So it's really fascinating to think about why some cities went down this route and others didn't, because it's certainly not every city in the Roman world.
Finley says, thank you so much. This was fascinating. I had never heard of these tokens before. Are there any sort of token hoards known?
Yeah, so in a sense, I guess it could be considered a hoard, like the dredging of the Tiber. I mean, or they all could have just like washed down a sewer. When they were kind of also dredging the River Liri at Minturnae, they said, oh, with one sort of dredge of the shovel, we brought up all these kind of tokens. But again, that could just be kind of river deposits, not just necessarily intentional deposition. So we have kind of found tokens clustered together. One example was at the bar, a particular set of baths in Ostia. These are the baths that we think were run and owned by the kind of carriage drivers. So the individuals who drove people between Ostia and Rome in horse carriages, like the Roman taxi drivers. And there's a baths right at the edge of Ostia, which makes sense for taxi drivers because you would pull up to Ostia, head into the bathhouse, which has all these kind of designs celebrating these amazing taxi drivers. They're called Kiziari, and like kind of running around in their horse in their carriages. It's great. And the horses' names. But in there, when they excavated the kind of one of the rooms in the bathhouse, they did find kind of a set, kind of, well, not a set, like a series of tokens, which were clearly then connected to these bars and to these carriage drivers because they have like a wheel, a whip. And so in that sense, they're clearly somehow also functioning the bathhouse. But thank God we found them, because without that context, if you had a wheel and a whip, I mean, it could be anything. You'd be like, oh, games or things like that. Other kind of deposits are like in wells and stuff. Like, as I say, unfortunately, they just kind of end up in these secondary abandonment contexts. In Athens, and they're kind of different to Roman tokens, but in Athens, they did find a whole bunch together in the Stoa of Attalos. And the idea is that's what the token's kind of being handed in to be melted down, to be reissued. In Palmyra, the reason we think these are tokens for banquets is that in one pot in a banqueting hall, they found like 100 and something tokens, all of the same design. So clearly the collection had taken place, everyone had handed in their ticket, and then that just got preserved. So yeah, but they're kind of rare in that sense because, yeah, I mean, I think unless you've kind of hoarded them and not remelted them down, which we think most people did, they wouldn't be together. It's just people dropping them or things like that. Yeah.
I believe there's another question coming.
Yeah, coming
but I have one of my own.
Yeah.
Do we have any examples of these tokens being found outside of their intended area of circulation?
Yeah, so some of the Roman tokens have ended up in France, which is a little odd. Some of them ended up in North Africa, always in port cities. And so I do wonder, particularly because these are being used in Ostia, whether it's in essence like merchants, right, who are going between all these port cities, and so they've got a token that, was clearly for use in Ostia, but they sailed down to North Africa to collect some grain or whatever, and it's kind of ended up there. And same in France. Some have been found in the Thames, which is super weird. But it's unclear how they arrived there. And some people are also wondering whether, because in much later periods, you would kind of dredge things and throw ballast into ships and then just dump it in the Thames. So it could have been a much later kind of context for that. And so we also find kind of small numbers at neighboring kind of cities around Rome and Ostia. So like in Nemi, in Gabii, so these kind of local places, which again, I think is just individuals traveling, happening to have a token on them, which does reveal a little bit about how tokens were used in that they're clearly being issued in advance of an event. In some cases, not during an event. So you could wander off with your token and forget to hand it in and then drop it somewhere else and be like, oh, I need to make an offering to Hercules. This token will do. It's like a coin, but not a coin. Costs me nothing. Which we all know that's what people do for votive offerings, right? So yeah, they do kind of travel, but I think not in any kind of intended way. So the one thing that was popular even in antiquity were the spintriae. So there's a lot of fakes out there, by the way, of spintriae. Be warned. If you have regular diaxes, be very suspicious, because they normally have random diaxes. And even in antiquity, they were being imitated. So we have quite a few. Well, we have one spintriae at a tomb from Mutina in Italy, which is an imitation spintriae, but then buried in someone's tomb. So clearly popular even in antiquity. The spintriae, the sex tokens, as they're sometimes called.
Interesting, thank you. Felicity asks if there is any evidence of secret tokens, e.g., marked with a fish to gain entry to mass safely.
Yeah, it's hard to know, in all honesty, whether they were secret or not, because we just have the artifact, right? And I mean, the designs, as we're saying, like a lot of them are quite cryptic and clearly were only intended to be understood by a particular group. So that kind of makes it difficult. They do have Christian tokens in late antiquity, which are not mass produced in terms of cast lead. They're kind of hand engraved and much more kind of, yeah, like a lot of care is taken of them, and they're clearly not one-off things. And if you're interested in that, you can look at the work of I'm going to put his name in the chat, Christian Mondello, who's been working a lot on the tokens of late antiquity, particularly Christian tokens. So they're clearly for reuse or something else. They're much more expensive items. But this kind of matches with what we know about late antiquity, in which you would want to give out these kind of, let's call them party favors, which essentially, in Ephesus, they are actually called party favors, the tokens. But the party favors or the gifts and events were becoming increasingly more and more elaborate, like engraved ivory, silver inset tokens. But that's late antiquity for you. So I can't imagine people threw those away once they received them. So, yeah.
Finley asks if the token you mentioned about the German baths, do you think it is referencing a bath owned by a German or perhaps one catering to Germans in Rome?
Yeah, I think it would be just the name of the owner would be my guess. And as I said, we don't know anything else about it, actually. A few other bath tokens mention the kind of bath attendant. So the kind of guy who was hired to run this bath, and this kind of like run by one guy bathhouse. Again, is kind of characteristic of these smaller establishments as opposed to big imperial baths. Yeah, so my instinct is, because it's the name of the bathhouse, it would be whoever owned it or sponsored it, or something like that. But yeah, it's quite hard to kind of, yeah, figure it out. They remain. Rostovtsev, when he wrote his book on tokens, he was like, they're so frustrating. So I'm like, yes, sometimes they are.
Felicity asks, can you have any idea of date from styling?
Yeah, like, so sometimes you can date it roughly on like the hairstyles, particularly for female portraits. Like, oh, that's clearly Flavian, or that's clearly Trajanic. But as you can see from some of the quality, they're not great. So this is probably, I'm guessing, a Julio-Claudian portrait. People tell me that's the case, so it's clearly Julio-Claudian. But you can see kind of the busts on this one over here. It's kind of a bit, yeah. So you can kind of probably go off the hairstyle, also probably an earlier period. So on that basis, you can kind of make rough guesses. This is also, we think, probably Julio-Claudian, just on the basis of the portrait type and the short hair and no beard. But yeah, it can be difficult in that sense. So this token, we think, probably dates to like the Domitianic period or somewhere around there, simply because coins of the same period carry that laurel branch, and there's clearly some connection going on there, or some inspiration. So you can kind of roughly do it that way. But there are many, many kind of tokens which, and I didn't show them because they're not that pretty, which is just kind of stick figures or have 3 letters, and that kind of makes it quite hard. So yeah, and I was quite hesitant to give dates just on the basis of style a lot of times. So others, I think, probably will be better at stylistic dating than I am in terms of hairstyles. It's never been my forte, but I think there is work to be done there, definitely, on that, especially on the basis of the portraiture styles.
Yeah, that's a very, very tricky thing to do.
I know,
someone
and
that's
something
working
that
on it currently.
I don't have that much expertise in, like, yeah, portraiture, but I'm hoping now that the material is more available, that those with kind of expertise in portraiture will take up the challenge. And several people have already said, Claire, why haven't you dated this? It's clearly whatever. I'm like, oh, thank you. Perfect. Yeah, so
Okay,
yeah.
with that, I don't think there are any more questions. So I'll thank you again, Claire, for the great talk, and I will end the call.
Thank you. Thank you all for giving up your lunch break. I hope you enjoyed it.